Welcome to Soundbreaker. In today's episode, we're talking to Glenn McDonald, who is a music technology innovator and a strategist. Glenn, thanks for joining us today. For our listeners who might not be familiar with you, please introduce yourself. Not too much, just a little before we dive into it.
Hi, I'm Glenn McDonald. I do not normally introduce myself as an innovator. I think you earn that title by doing things, but I think of myself as a problem solver mostly. Yes.
Interesting. Can you please take us back a bit, in your early days where what really put you on that path to get into the music business, the music tech business, I should say? What was the reason that pushed you towards that path?
Well, I graduated from college and I really thought I wanted to be a musician. I wasn't very good at it though, so I knew I needed a job and I knew a little bit about computers, so I signed up with a temp agency and they sent me to do tech support at Lotus Development. So this was the era of the 123 spreadsheet. And people would call and they would have problems and I'd have to help them. And I really think that everybody who works in technology of any kind ought to have to spend a year in tech support. It's like the technology version of compulsory military service because you learn to have empathy for people and you learn that what people say their problem is usually 5 levels past what their problem originally was. By the time they ask you for help, they've made their problem far worse by trying to solve it. And you have to sort of reel back and find out what they were trying to do originally. And that was what my career turned into in design, is trying to understand what the human problems were that we were trying to solve. And I was always interested in music data, but for most of my early career, the big music data was my record collection database. And eventually streaming came along and suddenly there was a lot more data than just my collection. So eventually there was a business of doing things with music data, and I lucked my way into it by having done a bunch of little projects on my own that I could point to and say, yeah, I can do music data. And so I got a job at this place called the Echo Nest, which was a startup trying to do recommendations and music categorization and stuff as a service for these new streaming platforms, which were just
Mm,
coming into being.
interesting. I mean, yes, that was a big change from physical to streaming. That was a big, big change and a big step. How did your early experience in UI design influence your later work in the music technology or the music tech business?
I mean, I think it's all ultimately the same kind of task, figuring out what it is you're trying to change about the world
Hmm.
and then how you go about that with software, with data, with analysis. But ultimately all these things are human problems or opportunities, and that's the same whether you're making spreadsheets or playlists ultimately.
Hmm. Interesting. What inspired you to build a comprehensive music exploration platform? Every noise at once. That's the name of the platform.
Yeah, if listeners haven't seen it, everynoise.com is where it lives, and there's a bunch of things there, but the front page is a giant map of all the genres,
Yeah.
200 plus, that we were tracking when I worked at Spotify. And that map began actually at the Echo Nest before we were acquired by Spotify as a diagnostic tool, because we were trying to build machine learning driven
Hmm.
measurements of psychoacoustic properties of music. Like, how danceable is this? How acoustic or electronic is it? And we had these machine learning processes to try to calculate those things, but it was pretty difficult to figure out how well we were doing, because you have 60 million songs, you train on human annotated examples of a few hundred or maybe 1,000, and then you run whatever your ML model is and the other 60 million, and you can't check them all. Otherwise, you would have just tagged them yourself to begin with. Organizing the sort of average scores by genre was a way to kind of get a sense of where we were doing well and where we weren't. So if we were trying
Mhm.
to calculate how acoustic something is, then if you aggregate those scores, you better find that like classical piano is very acoustic, and you better find that trance is very electronic. And if you don't, then that's a problem. And as I was making these graphs of things just to figure out what we were doing right and wrong, it started to be
Mhm.
like, wait, this is kind of an interesting way to look at this music. It's kind of an interesting way to explore. And so that's how the map originally came to be.
Hmm, interesting. So the company that you working for, it got sold to, you said Spotify.
Yeah, eventually, so we had been trying to get Spotify as a customer from the beginning because it was pretty clear that was going to be the big one.
Hmm.
And it was sort of a race to see whether Spotify would develop their own recommendations team or get enough money to buy us. And I guess the money won. Yeah. So we got acquired in 2014. And I spent the next 10 years about at Spotify.
Interesting. Learned a lot, I'm sure, boy, working with Spotify.
Yeah,
Different stuff. Yeah.
500 million people listening to music for several hours a day is a lot of it's a lot of data, it's a lot of cultural knowledge. It was fascinating to be embedded in that.
Hmm. You wrote a book.
I wrote a book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. You have not yet heard your favorite song. And it dives into the streaming changes. How did the streaming into it came into the music business and changed the whole thing about it. Let's talk about it. What was the reason for it? What's the book about? And for our listeners and viewers who might not be familiar with it again, so they can go out there, probably download it or listen to it or buy it.
Yes, indeed. I've been part of the streaming music industry, but now I'm also part of the very old fashioned printed book industry, although there's an ebook too. Uh, as someone who had to think about music and streaming all day for my job, I would also read everything that I could find that was written about it. And it was always a little dissatisfying to me because most of the things that are written about music and streaming are written by journalists, naturally,
Hmm.
because those are the people whose job it is to write about stuff. But because they generally weren't the people doing the work, they had to interview experts and then report what experts said. And that meant that there was a lot of writing that wasn't informed from an inside perspective and didn't know how things really worked, and often had somebody's grudge to motivate. And fear sells. Like when you're trying to get people interested in reading something, fear is a good motivator. But I felt that streaming was basically positive, and I
Hmm.
wanted someone to write a version of this story that was well informed, not about company secrets, but just understands how these things work, and was ultimately optimistic about it. And eventually, I realized that that person who had to write that was me, and so I started doing it, and it went pretty well. And eventually, I finished doing it, and I found a publisher, and thus the book exists, and you can buy it on Amazon, and you can read it.
Glenn, you were on both sides of the fence. You worked at one of the biggest, or the biggest DSP, digital streaming music platform out there, Spotify. And you're by work on the private sector and worked for Spotify on both sides. As Do you think the excitement of streaming music now is the same, or it's really went down? The earning, everybody talks about the earning went down. Sure, there's a lot more artists uploading music than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. A lot
Yeah,
more,
yeah,
and that's the nature. I mean, there are always going to be new artists, new people inspired, people want to be musician, people who that's what they thrive to be, and you cannot stop that. Obviously, it's an evolution, and we're evolving every day. What do you think of the future of streaming? Is it going to be the same? Will be new technology going to kind of be going to get introduced to us in the next 5 years, and DSPs become part of the past, like Tower was once the leading tower, and FIE stores, and all of these Virgin and HMV and so forth and so forth.
Yes,
And yeah,
I remember those days well.
yes,
I think it's tempting to think that streaming will go the way of cassettes and LPs and CDs, and there'll be a new format. But I don't know. I think maybe we've until we can beam the music directly into your brain. I'm not sure that we've got any more innovations in basic formats coming. Companies, however, come and go a lot faster than formats. So I won't be at all surprised if 10 years from now the top music streaming services are not any of the ones that we see now, just because stuff changes. But I think the interesting parts of the future are probably not no longer just about format, which I think is good because I think format is boring. Like the difference between storage and
Mhm.
transmission and bit rates and encodings, like that's not the interesting stuff about music.
Um, do you think that the gaming industry advanced way past the music business, and obviously, and they became the place, and not the place, I would say the direction where the music consumption will go, because it's all about the experience, the experiential kind of.
I mean, the thing about music is that it's part of everything else too. So gaming,
Yes,
soundtracks for
yes.
TV and movies, it's yeah, it's your soundtrack for everything. Economically, yes, it's dispersed through all these other things instead of just itself.
Hmm.
But this at the same time, like the fact that people now carry phones and have earbuds means that the old fashioned kind of listening too is ubiquitous, and you can have music in all parts of your life, and that's partly due to streaming, partly due to other things.
But that's going to become old and boring just to listen to music like this, I
I,
think.
I feel a great wave of sadness come over me as you say that, because to me, listening to music,
No, not
like
listening to music, just listening
it's,
to it that way without being part of it. I think a lot of the new younger generations, where they want now more than just sticking an earpiece and just listening to the music that way. They want to be part of it, you know.
I think ultimately there will still be this huge role for just, as you say, just listening to music in strictly in format terms. But I think wanting to be part of something is a super real desire. And I think this is one of the things that almost all the streaming services right now sort of miss, that listening is not just listening, but you listen in part to be part of your community, to have things to talk to your friends about, to hear what other people are hearing.
Mhm.
And that experience of music as a community is sort of barely implicit in most of the streaming experiences at the moment.
Mhm. Interesting. And with AI being uh, part of the tool creation for the music business or the music industry right now, which is, I'm all for any tool that could help and advance artists and give them more control and more, how should I say, better placement and, faster. Any thoughts on the AI tools that you've been seeing popping up everywhere, whether it's a promotion tool or mastering or mix down tool or all kind of tools? I think there's so many AI tools that come up every day, sampling tools.
Yeah, we're definitely at the stage where people are applying AI to everything. It's like when plastic was invented, and suddenly everything has to have plastic in it somewhere.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we won't get to the point where we're trying to recycle AIs, but I won't be too surprised. But I think there's several different ways that AI reaches us in the music business. It's tempting to be afraid of it and think like because I basically think that AI generated music in the sense of like you type a sentence and you get a song is just morally irrelevant. Like the point of music is for humans to express ourselves to each other. So the idea that AI would take over and generate songs is an amazing technical feat, but it's no more useful to me than a robot that would eat my dinner.
Yes.
I guess not a problem. It's not a problem I have. There's plenty of music already. We don't need more music.
Yes.
But by the same token, AI as a tool can be just the same as synthesizers were. Like
Yes.
people freaked out that synthesizers could produce violin sounds without you learning to play violin, and I'm sure we could go back and find the dire articles predicting that music was dying because all the violins would be fake and nobody would ever learn to play violin
And
anymore.
all
And
these
music is
modules and
yeah,
samples and yeah,
and
yeah,
music is soulless if it
yeah,
doesn't have the
yeah.
wood and resin behind
Yes.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that wasn't entirely untrue, but it's also entirely untrue. Like you can have music with as much soul as you want that comes through a synthesizer, even if the patch you're using is
There's a lot of
sort of
great
a
records.
violin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So I
Yes.
think we have to get to that point with AI tools where they're more like synthesizers and less like fake musicians. And
Yeah.
and you said the right thing, like control, like increasing the expressivity of
Yeah.
artists. That's what tools are supposed to do. That's what
Yes.
synthesizers became, right? They
Yes.
became in some ways more expressive than the violin. Like you can
Yeah.
do all these things to the sound that you couldn't do with your wooden instrument, your horsehair bow.
Yes.
In recommendations, I think AI is at the moment a big distraction. AI and machine learning are amazing when you have way too many variables for humans to deal with. So if you're sequencing genes and like trying to find new pharmaceuticals, that's a great use of AI. When you're generating playlists, the amount of data involved there is really small. Like if you generate a playlist for somebody and they listen to 5 songs, and they're 3 minutes each, that's like 5 decisions they're making in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
You do not need AI for that. And in fact, the more complicated you make your recommendations platform, the harder it is to tell if you're doing a good job. So I was ironically sort of the loyal opposition to AI for a lot of things at Spotify. I'm like, just use math. Look, math, statistics, algebra, dividing things by other things. It's really powerful. It's really easy to understand. It's really fast to iterate. You don't need a model for most of this stuff.
You saw there's so much the increasing kind of trend. A lot of platforms coming up focusing on artist and fan engagement. And any thoughts on that? I mean, there's been a lot of new platform that I've been noticing and seeing. Solely focus on the fans or the users having more of an active role, supporting the artists, working with the artists, some of them investing in the artists, and
Yeah,
trading.
I think it's the right
Hmm.
impulse because I think this, like I said, that this is the thing that seems most lacking to me in the current music streaming experiences. It's not that they don't have enough AI, it's that they don't have enough human community. Like it's weird that we've been doing streaming for a decade plus, but I still go somewhere other than where I listen to talk about music. Like I go to a discussion forum, I go to Reddit, I go to a mailing list to talk about the things that we love to listen to. And then we go to Spotify to listen. But that's weird. And I think this current surge of interest in superfan communities is motivated by that same feeling of absence. It's channeled into like monetization. Like, is this a way for artists to make more money?
Hmm.
Which I guess is ultimately the goal. I mean, we are trying to support artists. If I had been in charge
Hmm.
of Spotify's business, I would have said our goal is to make money for artists. And I was not. I'm not in charge of public companies, thankfully for the investors. But I think that communities of fans around an artist is a good kind of community. And if you're a popular enough artist, like if you're Taylor Swift or
Yeah.
BTS, you have a large community who thinks of themselves as part of that community. I don't think that is as helpful for smaller emerging artists. I think in those cases, mostly you need both the listeners and the artists to think of themselves as part of a larger community, as part of a local community or a genre community or something, because you don't have quite the same gravity around a band with 800 fans as you do around Taylor Swift.
What's some of the most exciting advancement in the music tech world that you witnessed during your career?
So I think you have to think about technology as a very broad
Yes.
term, and I think of anything including computer programs is technology to me. And the one that I'm honestly most excited about 10 years later is just the collecting of collective knowledge. And so the fans also like list on a Spotify artist page is Spotify's most direct and prominent use of this, and other services have the same
Hmm.
idea. But that the idea that because streaming is inherently tracked, and your everything you listen to, the streaming service now knows what it is because otherwise the system doesn't work, means that when you are listening, you are also expressing your expertise about what you like, and you don't really think of yourself as creating by listening, but you really are. Like everybody listens in a non-random way, and so everything that you play is sort of an assertion that this is the kind of thing that someone who likes the things I like would listen to. And if you play it again and again, it becomes an assertion that this is the kind of thing that someone who likes what you like would like. And our ability to collect that knowledge from 500 million people at once is is astonishing. And it
It is.
means that we can map these audiences onto each other and find out that this audience for this artist likes these other artists. And it was always possible to do that in little decentralized ways. And an artist could make a list of their friends or the bands they play with or their influences. But now suddenly we can do it for everything. And so the giant map of artist similarities that underlies that Spotify fans also like feature
Mhm.
is like a unique structure in knowledge in human history, and I think incredibly fascinating.
Mm. Any memorable projects that that you could share with us that you worked on or you're part of back in your days at Econest or Spotify?
There are very many. I mean, the two that I spent the most time on are that fans also like algorithm and system and the genre system that the Every Noise at Once map is. But one that I thought was had great promise that I didn't get to finish when I left Spotify is
Mm.
I was hoping, and I still hope this for the future, but it's still going to take a lot of work, is to get to the point where record labels, especially independent record labels, have a strong presence, each one of them on streaming. And there's not quite the right data to do it at the moment because the label field in the metadata that goes into the streaming service is just a text field, and there aren't IDs yet for labels. And so it sometimes works if you have a label with a very unique name and they're very consistent about how they write it
Hmm.
in their artists' release data. Labels are little communities, not the giant ones. The giant ones are communities of what they can make money off of, but the thousands and thousands of independent labels are mostly based around people with specific interests in musical styles or music from a given place or something.
Hmm.
And those are always fascinating. And I was always excited to discover, a profound lore, which is a metal label. Once you find one of these, you're like, these people share my taste and they go find bands for me. Like that's sort of the function of a label, and it works at that level. And so there's a little thing on, if you go down to the bottom of everynoise.com, there's some other other experiments that aren't the same, aren't just the genre map. And there's one where I tried to do a map of labels, and it's not, it's sort of halfway there because we didn't have the data really, and the labels aren't really participating in that way yet. But it's pretty
Mhm.
interesting to see a map of labels done the same way as the map of genres. So you can see sort of where the metal labels show up in one quadrant and the hip hop labels somewhere else, and it
Interesting.
pointed towards a future that's more sort of more decentralized and more participatory, and where labels have more of a presence online.
Glenn, what challenges you think musicians or artists and music companies face today?
I mean, I think there's basically giant good news and giant bad news for from streaming. And the good news
Yes.
is there are 500 million listeners that are a few clicks away from your song. Like, you technically could be as big as Ed Sheeran tomorrow.
Yes.
The bad news, of course, is those clicks are probably not going to happen. Like, probably people are going to click their way to Ed Sheeran and not you. But and this this fuels all talk about how many people can make a living from music, and is are people earning more or less? And a lot of people who were earning a lot before are still earning a lot, and a lot of people who didn't get to participate in this world at all are now earning a little bit, but mostly the power structures haven't changed.
Hmm.
And that's sort of the bad news, because it means that just because you can get your songs on Spotify doesn't mean that you can make a living from it. But I think it's also mostly good news, because really the things that you needed to do if you wanted to make a career out of music mostly are still the same. Most of the things that you would have known to do before are still the things you need to do and still work. So building your audience, finding an audience locally, finding an audience in a scene, building relationships with other bands, touring with them, releasing songs with them, collaborating. That's the way that you built a music career before, and it's really still the way you build a career. And if
So
you
you're saying going back to the basics, basically for an artist, like why you're not streaming, why you're not getting more than 1,000 streams or up to 1,000 streams or getting a million or 100,000, whatever. Going back to the basics, really. You go back to the old basic playbook.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's tempting to blame the streaming services or turn it around and try to game the streaming
Yeah.
services, and it mostly doesn't work. Sometimes you can figure something out, that's some interesting trick that works very temporarily, but if it's not building your audience in the old-fashioned ways that you always would have, then it's not going to help you in the long term. So basically, what I always tell people when they ask me for the secrets that I learned from 10 years of working at Spotify was, the main secret I learned is there are no secrets. Like, it doesn't help. None of those things to try to trick the algorithm help. They mostly don't even work, and they don't help you in the long run. So do the things that
Well,
you always knew that you should have done. Yeah. Build your audience, find fans, try to
yes.
give them
But we
something
did
that they
see,
love.
yes, but we did see a flux of a huge wave of new artists came in because of TikTok. They didn't tour, they didn't do any of the didn't go to the to the original playbook of how to build an artist and audience and all of that and establish it. They went the easy route. They went to TikTok, and TikTok became the place where a lot of new artists discovered, get signed by major labels. They touring because of that. They TikTok became kind of the new way to promote your music or promote yourself as a new artist, by a simple, silly, I wouldn't call it silly, cleverly silly video that caught everybody's attention. It became viral, and your music happened to be on that video. And because of that, all of a sudden, from a song was recorded in your bedroom or your kitchen on your laptop in your kitchen table, now it's a worldwide phenomenon that everybody's singing it. And you heard that song, they heard it on TikTok and all of that. And then
Yeah,
all
it's
of a
true
sudden
that
your streaming is just went to the roof through TikTok or any other platform. I mean, not TikTok. I'm sorry, Spotify or any other streaming platform.
yeah, and that will, so part of that is a temporary effect of TikTok still being sort of new in the world in historical terms. And so there was opportunity for a lot of people that took advantage of this new platform. But it's still it if it's going to work for those people in the long term, they have to build those audiences. So you lucked into a way to for people to discover you, but then touring behind it, like that's the hard work, is giving those people something that makes them a fan of yours instead of just someone who heard 15 seconds of your song once.
Got it.
That's the old fashioned work.
Hmm. So it opens the doors for you, but it doesn't mean you're not going to have to do that work. Yes, it
Right.
opened the door, but now you need to still do it in order to stay there because you don't want that temporary effect on it.
Yeah, you can't rely on TikTok to keep feeding people
Yeah.
your new songs like that. It won't do that work for you. You'll have to do that work.
Would you say TikTok is the current experience that people, all generation, I wouldn't say young because it's all ages on it, that kind of enjoy and that became a wave listening and consuming music and new music being born? But that's not the future. But you're seeing that people going through that kind of leaning more towards that experience. They enjoying that experience, even if it's a video. But hey, it's part of it is the music they created or the video they create. So give them that experience. That's something you can watch and be kind of part of, but you're not really part of it, but you are.
Yeah, I mean, it works for some people. In some ways, it's an evolution of MTV. In some ways, it's something new. For me, the problem, it's sort of ironic. I look at TikTok sometimes, but I always do it with the sound off because I'm always listening to music at the same time. So it never works for me as a music discovery thing because
Mhm.
I'm already listening to the music that I've discovered. It, yeah, I think ultimately it's probably not the best way to discover music. It, music focused music discovery I still think is more interesting, but TikTok has done a good job of giving you a feeling of discovery. Arguably, they've done a better job than the streaming services, which is a sad report on the state
I
of music discovery on streaming services as much as anything else.
think it'll be something mere between kind of TikTok and Roblox experience where you kind of create your own music and that's where it becomes you part of it. And that's the new experience that will be, and that's maybe the future of uh, consuming content. I
I mean, I think
always,
the key to me is engaging people's curiosity.
yes,
And I think this is where streaming services often fall down is are, they fall into thinking of personalization as a way to encourage passive listening, which is good for streaming metrics because if you get people to sort of put something on and leave it, then their listen time goes up
yeah,
and all your dashboards look good. But in the long term, if people don't feel engaged in their music and they do feel engaged in TikTok or playing video games, then the music becomes a support thing for the other activities. But if you feel like for me, I feel far more interested in music than I do in games or
yes,
people's dance videos.
yes,
And that I think is part of what the music industry needs in order to grow
hmm,
is to actually get people's attention back. Like the thing that's great about music is not that it makes your video game better. From my point of view, the thing about video games is they give you something to do with your hands while you're listening to music. It's totally the other way around for me.
insightful, very insightful, Glenn. How do you balance your creative aspect of the music with the tech aspect of it also in design, algorithm, and software solutions?
This was honestly a sort of at least half of my role at Spotify is reminding people
Yeah,
that we were dealing with music and it wasn't just content and it wasn't the same as everything else. Like music has its own parameters and if you are thinking about them, then you do different things. Like the goal was having people find joy, having musicians find listeners and when you get deep into technological techniques and machine learning and programming, those things, the danger is those things become the goals, and you start thinking more about advancing the state of machine learning
Mhm.
than you do about advancing the state of music. And so my like annoying role at Spotify was to just keep asking, wait, what are we doing to music here? Like, don't tell me about the increases in listening time from your change in technical stacks. Tell me what changed about the music. Did we recommend different music to people? Did this get better for hip hop fans and worse for metal fans? Did it get better in Estonia but worse in Indonesia? Like, talk to me about the people and what we're doing to their experience of music.
Interesting. Your writing covers music, tech, curiosity, morality, and how do these themes shape your work?
I think ultimately tools from a lever to an algorithm are sort of applied moral philosophy. Like there's something in the world that you're trying to make easier, some
Yeah.
human motivation or goal that you're trying to give them the ability to accomplish. And those goals all have morality and human dimensions attached to them. So you make it easier for people to hit each other in the head,
Yeah.
then that's the you're helping them do a violent thing. If you make it easier for them to fall in love, you're doing the opposite kind of thing. And everything that we do in technology that intervenes in human relationships or culture does this. And this was true when I was working on team collaboration software too. Like the tools that people use to collaborate will affect how the relationships in a team get built, and everything that you do, you have to think about how you're changing the people, how you're interfering with their connections or making it easier for them to connect.
Mhm. Um,
That's what all technology is about.
yes. What advice do you have for aspiring entrepreneurs in the music tech world?
I This is funny because I wasn't really in the advice business, and then I got laid off, and I spent 6 months talking to every strange startup who wanted to make some piece of the music business work better.
Yes.
And I basically tell everybody the same thing that I tell students who ask, how does the job world work and what should I do in my life? Which is find something that you care that it's done well and that you can tell the difference between when it's done well and it's done badly. And that's the message for someone about to get their degree or someone about to have a startup, because it's really caring about the results is what forces you to learn what you have to learn to make it good. Like if you just learn a programming language from a course or a book, you'll do the things, you'll get to the end, and you'll just move on. But when you really care about the result, you get to the end and you're like, this is not quite right yet. Like I know what I want from this. These are not the right metal bands, or these are the right metal bands, but these are not the right songs, or this playlist doesn't flow right, or it's too long, or it's too short, and then suddenly you have to go learn whatever it is to make it good. And I think most interesting work is the result of someone obsessively making something good because they wanted it to be good.
Perfection. And any favorite startups that you came across recently and you had that kind of exciting effect on it, on you?
I think there were a lot small teams without money yet who have seen some part of the music business
Mm,
and thought this maybe we could change the future if we start here. And it's really hard. The music business is a really hard business to make
yeah,
big changes because there are a small number of really entrenched
correct.
companies that have most of the power. So most of the people I talked to, I by the end of the conversation, I was like, I am so glad you're trying this. You will probably fail. And and that's true. Most of these companies will fail to get funding. Some of the ones that do will fail to survive long
or,
enough.
or establish the success they were looking for.
Yeah, because
You know,
they're up against
the
just
giants who
major,
got
yeah, major
the biggest
labels
share.
and right,
They got
the
the
Amazon
majority of the
and
share in the business. Yes, yeah,
yeah, it's really hard. But by the same token, it's really hard for any of those established companies to make big changes. Like I at Spotify, I basically felt like I was nudging a giant ship, and every once in a while, I could nudge it a little bit in a direction that I thought was better, but I couldn't move it very much. And small companies can make big changes. Like that's a small ship, and you can steer a small ship, and you can turn in a small ship. So I think although most of the individual ones will fail, some of them will succeed, and that's where the big changes in the future will come from. And I think you've already seen that from in the distribution world. Like now, I mean, my songs are on Spotify, and they're on there because there are indie distributors where you can just sign up, and suddenly your goofy little songs that you did in GarageBand and your
yes.
in your home office are there on Spotify, and it's a whole lot easier to send them to my friends when I didn't have to mail
Yes.
them a CD.
Glenn, as a music evangelist, how do you see technology continuing to shape the future of music creation and consumption?
Yeah, I think those two are related, but sort of different. I think, like we said, that the the tools are going to help. I love especially tools that take things that weren't really going to be parts of your creative process, but were just burdens. So like mastering as a person who makes my own terrible songs, mastering was just a frustrating part where I knew that there were skills I didn't have that would make my songs sound like normal, well produced songs. But I like there was no way to justify hiring an expert to master my stupid songs. Like, but an AI tool that will do it for me and will do it a tenth as well as a human, but 10 times as well as I would do, a tenth as well as a actual mastering engineer, but 10 times better than I could do it. That's a great advance. So I think there are going to be a lot of things like that make it possible to
Yes.
do stuff that you weren't going to do on your own and you couldn't afford to have done for you, which is cool. On the listening side, I think we're sort of running out of things to do for individual listeners.
Mhm.
And my hope is that we will see more effort from the listening side go into community building, go into bringing back shared experiences of music in more than just. And right now we have sort of you can listen to at a party and multiple people can cue songs, but I
Yeah.
mean extending the communal aspect of music into your whole listening life and figuring out how your listening connects you to fans both around you and that you wouldn't have been able to find out about or reach before. That seems more interesting to me.
Any upcoming projects that you're working on you'd like to share or mention to our listeners and viewers to look for?
I think I I'd like people to read my book, and I'd like people to think about their projects because I have some, um, but there's only one of me, and I think we'll get a lot further if a lot of other people are making stuff. For me, as someone no longer on the inside, I'm super interested in how we get back the knowledge that we the listeners create by listening. I It was amazing to have access to all that data at Spotify, but I also felt the whole time like it's wrong that I have to work at Spotify to be able to do this. Like
Hmm.
all this stuff is not Spotify's expertise, it's the listeners' expertise. Almost all the interesting things that I did at Spotify were because we had all these people listening, not because of Spotify's unique expertise. And I think some of these startups will begin to build ways to liberate that information again and to give it back to us so that we can collect our knowledge without relying on big companies to collect it and then maybe give us little bits of it back.
Well, it's been interesting, extremely insightful, Glenn, I have to say, for someone being on the inside, on the outside, share both sides.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for
And
having
this
me.
absolutely. And this concludes today's episode of Soundbreaker. Please make sure to follow us on socials and socials with an S. Yes. And stay tuned for new episode. Thank you and see you.
See ya.
My pleasure. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share the Soundbreaker podcast. And if you are joining us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time.